Hi, everybody. Welcome to Clinical Guidelines for Shift Work, Jet Lag, and Daylight Savings Time, Understanding Melatonin Supplementation. I am very glad to be here with you. The number of people who do shift work is about 20% of Americans. Many people are traveling, and of course, we all have to go through daylight savings time. So this is really going to affect a high percentage of your patients. My disclosures: I'm a medical team member of Symphony Natural Health, which is the manufacturer of Herbatonin. Herbatonin is a phytomelatonin made from alfalfa, rice, and chlorella. These are our objectives today. We're going to talk about the correct dose and timing of melatonin. We're going to talk about very specific treatment plans for those conditions. And then we'll talk also about the role that melatonin plays in cellular health as an antioxidant and anti-inflammatory for mitochondrial function. Last year, I was fortunate enough to team up with some of the other professionals involved in Symphony Natural Health, and we wrote this article about melatonin being the next vitamin D and made some comparisons between the actions of vitamin D, the actions of melatonin, and the role that proper sunlight exposure during the day and getting adequate darkness at night has for our overall health. So if you haven't seen that paper, I think it's a great read and summary. It's very comprehensive about melatonin. So let's start off with talking about our endogenous melatonin. And whenever I'm doing a training for professionals or I'm talking with clients, I try to be very, very clear in my language when we're talking about our endogenous melatonin that we create in our bodies ourselves versus melatonin supplementation. That is an area I find that sometimes people are kind of talking about both at the same time without necessarily even realizing it. All right, so this is part of our non-visual response to light. Basically, between the rods and cones in our retina and slightly in front, we have these specialized cells called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. Those cells are receiving the light signal and responding more to blue light than yellow or red light. They're sending that light signal to the brain, an area of the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And that area, the SCN, we abbreviate, sends a signal to the pineal gland in the presence of blue light, daylight, that suppresses our melatonin release. When the light shifts at sunset and it becomes more yellowish red light, that signal suppressing the release of melatonin from the pineal gland is lifted, and melatonin first bathes the brain, causing us to be drowsy and our core body temperature to start to drop. And then it goes throughout our circulation, and most cells in the body have melatonin receptors, actually. All right, so that is how the system works. Let's get a little bit down further into details here. Our daily melatonin production generally starts once the light is dim, less than 10 lux and without blue wavelengths in it. Melatonin levels peak in the middle of the night, in the middle of the sleep period, really, and then decline. When we wake up, our melatonin levels are still slightly elevated, but that morning light, as we open our eyes, open the shades, hopefully go outside, receive that light signal, it suppresses our morning melatonin. And what is interesting is that morning melatonin, that morning light pulse, it's so strong, actually helps increase our nocturnal melatonin and shift it slightly earlier. So that is one of the reasons you want to make sure that your clients are getting adequate morning light. The recommendation is at least 20 minutes of morning light in the first 2 hours of your day. This image I love, Mother Earth. And the reason that it's important here is because I like for people to remember the natural light-dark system that we all, our physiology, human physiology, evolved in. And our physiology is still designed for those natural light-dark cues, but we have stepped away from them. This is what we're living in nowadays, right? We're getting light at night, which is completely unnatural environment, and it wreaks havoc with our physiology. So the first thing I want to talk about light is the difference between our natural light exposure versus electric light. And let me just orient you here to this chart. We've got time here on the bottom from midnight on the left, noon in the middle to the following midnight, 24 hours. And then on the y-axis, it's a logarithmic scale looking at lux. Lux is a measure of light. 1 lux is equal to 1 candle flame from 3 feet away. So a lux is not very much. And you can see this scale is logarithmic. It goes from 10 lux to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000. If we start by looking at natural light, which is depicted in the yellow, from midnight until sunrise, we're getting no light, right? And then the lux increases sharply to somewhere between 10 and 30 lux, and it stays there through the day until sunset. And then the light declines quite significantly. And after sunset, we're getting no light in that natural environment. Compare that and contrast to the electric light, which is pictured in the blue. If we start at midnight, we're getting some light in the ambient environment, in our built environment. It's not until maybe 4 o'clock in the morning gets really dark. And then again, as the sun rises, the light increases, but it's only going to increase to about 1,000 lux, and it's going to stay there until the early afternoon. And then the light in our offices, in our homes, schools is going to start to decline. And in the evening after sunset, we're still going to get lights in our home. Compared to the natural environment, we're going to get no light. I think about this in terms of if we're getting inadequate light during the day and inadequate darkness in our modern lifestyle, it's going to have a big impact on our physiology. One of the things that changes significantly is our seasonal melatonin rhythms. And this is a study I love. I think it's very instructive. The references there for you at the bottom. They basically took folks, this was done in Colorado, they took folks who had no sleep problems, and they measured their light levels and their melatonin in the built environment, and then they took the folks camping to a really backcountry camping experience where there were no electric lights. So they really were embedded in that natural environment that our physiology is designed for. And what they found is that the melatonin in the electric light and in the natural light was quite different, both in winter and in summer. So if we look at this chart here on the image here on the right, the period of darkness is there in the black bar in the middle. And if we look at that top one, you can see that in the natural light environment, melatonin is going to start earlier, or melatonin release, and ultimately go longer than compared to that melatonin period at the top of the graph. In the electric light, melatonin is being released starting much later, several hours later. It's about 2.5 hours later, and it's also going to remain elevated a little bit longer than in that natural environment. Then this bottom three bars here represent summer. Summer darkness, obviously, shorter than winter darkness. Melatonin is again going to be released later in the electric light condition versus the natural light condition, and it's going to stay elevated later in the morning. This is really important because it's showing how our light conditions are affecting our melatonin, and ultimately electric lighting is going to push our endogenous melatonin release to be later at night. And this is going to be important for all of those shift workers, people who are in daylight savings time condition. So what are the recommendations for light? You want people during the day to be getting 250 lux of light, and it should include the blue spectrum. And that's a minimum, 250 lux as a minimum. One tip I like for people to do is on their phone, download a lux meter. And then my teenager laughs at me when I do this, but then I just like go around with the phone at my eye level, and I'm like checking my light levels, you know, at my desk, etc. I checked at my desk doing this the other day, and I'm getting like 160 lux at my desk with 2 screens, lights on, all of that, windows over here, not enough light. Evenings, you want people to, starting 3 hours before bedtime, 10 lux or less, and minimal of those short blue wavelengths. You want more of the yellowish, reddish hues. And then sleep environment, 1 lux at most. If they need to get up and care for an infant or someone else, or do something in the night, maximum 10 lux of light. All right, so that's kind of some of the physiology. Let's talk about therapeutic principles of light and melatonin. Then we're going to get into some specific protocols that will be very detailed. Let's talk about core body temperature. I think this is an area that just really needs more awareness as we start working more on people's sleep and circadian rhythms. So core body temperature fluctuation is there in the red. You've got time on the top x-axis, and then temperature there, Fahrenheit and Celsius on either sides. What is important to know is that when your core body temperature is dropping, you're going to feel sleepy or sleep really well. When your core body temperature is rising or high, you're going to feel more alert. And if you were sleeping, you're going to wake up. So looking at this chart, which starts at midnight here on the left, core body temperature is dropping until approximately 4 a.m. And then it starts to rise. That's why we start to wake up. It's fairly high late morning. There's a little bit of a dip in our core body temperature at about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That is why, one of the reasons why we have a little bit of a dip in our energy often in the early afternoon. Then it increases a little bit. So it's at its peak around 4, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and then it'll start to decline. This is one of the mechanisms by which we start to feel drowsy. When we talk about light therapy for circadian rhythm treatment, it's really important to get the timing correct. If you get light before your core body temperature minimum, it will shift your body clock later. So you fall asleep later and you wake up later. If, on the other hand, you get light as this yellow arrow depicts, after your core body temperature minimum, it's going to shift your body clock earlier. So you fall asleep earlier and you're ready to wake up earlier. This is really important because when we talk about daylight savings time, jet lag, shift work, all of those conditions, the person is likely to be getting light at the wrong time, and they're making the situation worse instead of better. For many people, when I talk about this concept, it's the first time that they have really come across this relationship between our core body temperature and the timing of light. So I will refer back to this, and hopefully it'll be coming together by the end of our time. The last thing to know about core body temperature is that you can't easily measure it at home. It really is core to your trunk. So testing somebody's temperature with the ear probe or whatnot is just not going to reflect these subtle but important changes. The best thing to do is to estimate it about 3 to 4 hours before the person's natural wake time. And notice that I say natural wake time. Many people, some people, particularly people of certain age groups, teenagers, for example, are not living at the right times for their circadian rhythm. They may be trying to get up before they're really ready to wake up physiologically, and trying to go to sleep before they're physiologically sleepy. Think of, teenagers are a perfect example. So when you're trying to estimate someone's core body temperature minimum, that's all you can do is estimate it, and you want to estimate it based on what they say is their natural or ad libitum sleep schedule. All right. So therapeutic light can be used to treat delayed sleep-wake phase, advanced sleep-wake phase, jet lag, shift work, and also seasonal affective disorder. I won't be talking about seasonal affective disorder today. Then the question also comes up about melatonin. We're going to use light, we're going to use melatonin. What is the right timing for melatonin? And what's really interesting is that the time that you give melatonin will also potentially have a phase shifting effect. Melatonin can be used, our melatonin has two actions, one as a chronotrope, which means time setter, and then it also has a hypnotic action. The use that you're probably accustomed to is as a hypnotic to promote sleep. The use that we're going to be focusing on today is as a chronobiotic or a chronotrope, which means it's setting someone's circadian rhythm, their timing. And the time that you take melatonin will have a big effect whether it's going to phase advance or phase delay. So a phase advance is when you're shifting a person's body clock earlier. So they fall asleep earlier and they wake up earlier. A phase delay is the opposite, getting them to not be sleepy until later at night and wake up later in the morning. When we talk about shift work and delayed sleep-wake phase and jet lag, we're going to use melatonin with these two different purposes, to phase advance or phase delay. All right, so enough explanation here. Let's look at some specifics. Each one of these vertical hash marks is representing 1 hour. And this dark blue in the middle is the middle of the person's sleep phase, and the blue bars are their sleep period. And if you want to phase advance, have someone go to sleep earlier, Using a low dose melatonin, 0.5, or I've used clinically 0.3 milligrams, 9 to 11 hours before their sleep midpoint is going to shift their body clock earlier. You could use the higher dose melatonin, 3 milligrams, even more hours, 10 to 12 hours before their sleep midpoint. I prefer to use the low dose melatonin in this case because you don't want someone to feel acutely sleepy. You don't want them to feel sleepy at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. You just want that low dose to use as a phase shifting compound. And then to cause a phase delay, you would have the person take melatonin actually after they wake up, and that's going to cause them to shift their body clock later. Notice that here in the gray on the bottom, during this time period, if you take 3 milligrams of melatonin, you should not cause any phase shift. If you take 0.5 milligrams of melatonin, you could potentially have a slight phase delay. And this is, sometimes people ask, and one of you submitted a question earlier about why is there a paradoxical effect of melatonin? And I think one of the reasons could be this, that people are taking the wrong dose at the wrong time. And so they're somehow phase advancing or phase delaying opposite to what their goal is. The other way that people take melatonin is as a hypnotic, which we'll talk about briefly later for insomnia and whatnot. One of the issues that I have, one of the concerns about melatonin is the supplement quality, and I'm not alone in that. This first study there showed that the melatonin content in some over-the-counter brands that were available in grocery stores in Ontario, the content ranged from 17 to almost 500% more than the labeled amount. The lot-to-lot content varied significantly, and then they also found some of them were contaminated with serotonin, which is a controlled substance in Canada. It was about 25% of those 31 brands were contaminated. The other area of concern with synthetic melatonin supplements is that they are made from precursors, thalidomide or this 5-methoxy-3-indole acetonitrile. Say that one 3 times fast, right? And they have potentially up to 14 contaminants. A couple of them of great concern are thalidomides and formaldehydes, not something you want to be taking on a nightly basis, right? Okay, so we've talked about some of the physiology of our endogenous melatonin. We've talked about light, the therapeutic use of light, some of the concerns and uses of melatonin. Let's start getting into clinical disorders here. So melatonin for insomnia. This review done in 2017 looked at many studies. They only included 12 because they wanted studies that were randomized, controlled, single or double blind. They found that melatonin is indicated for insomnia, either immediate release, which is in the 1 to 3 milligram dosage, less than 30 minutes before bed. When you're taking it that close to bedtime, it should not have a phase shifting effect. And then slow release, which can be used for sleep maintenance type problems, when a person's falling asleep easily at the beginning of the night, but they're awake in the later part of the night. Note that there's no additional benefit for higher doses in the sleep and circadian space. Certainly, we see melatonin at higher doses being useful for other conditions, medical conditions, but in the sleep and circadian space, we really don't use more than 3 milligrams, and there's no evidence for using higher doses. There is another condition, sleep condition, called delayed sleep-wake phase disorder. It is considered a circadian rhythm disorder, and about 10% of people who have been diagnosed with chronic insomnia are thought to have actually delayed sleep-wake phase disorder. And so if you're working with someone who has insomnia and their treatment is just not working, you might consider, are they someone who actually has delayed sleep-wake phase disorder? And so we should change the treatment to address that. The clinical picture and how you can kind of tease apart clinically in that interview if it's insomnia or delayed sleep-wake phase. Insomnia disorder, the sleep disruption can occur at any point in the night, whereas delayed sleep-wake phase, since their body clock is shifted later than social norms, they often have to get up and go to sleep before they're really sleepy. So they will only have a sleep onset type picture. Once they're asleep, they will sleep just fine. And insomnia, their pattern is going to be the same regardless of what time they go to bed. Whereas in delayed sleep-wake phase, when they are allowed to be on a later schedule, either it's vacation or they've just taken a job working swing shift, or they've become unemployed and they can sleep on their own schedule, they will sleep fine when they can sleep on those later hours. So those are a few tips on that. There is a whole category of circadian rhythm sleep-wake disorders. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this book. There's the International Classification of Sleep Disorders is a diagnostic manual, and it has the 6 different classes of sleep disorders and talks about the diagnostic criteria and clinical picture, demographics, prevalence, what's known of the pathophysiology of all 58 sleep disorders. So if you really want to hone your skills of diagnosing sleep disorders, that's the book to get. These are the circadian rhythm disorders. We're going to focus today on those 3 that I mentioned. So the first one, let's talk about here. The criteria are that criteria A is that the person has a experience of insomnia and or excessive daytime sleepiness accompanied by a reduction of their total sleep time associated with that recurring work schedule that overlaps with their usual time for sleep. Symptoms have been present and associated with shift work for at least 3 months, and then the sleep log and actigraphy monitoring demonstrate a disturbed sleep and wake pattern. When I'm working with clients, the definition that I like to go with and the questions I like to ask, I first like to ask, what are your natural sleep hours? Your ad libitum sleep onset, sleep offset times. Time do you naturally prefer to go to bed, to go to sleep, and to wake up? And then I like to find out, do your work hours or commute to work interfere with your natural sleep hours? Because I think when you think about it that way, it really personalizes it and individualizes the treatment plan and your understanding of their situation. And I'll give an example here. So I'm in my 50s. I've got a 20-year-old, and we sleep on very different sleep schedules. When she works at a restaurant and she doesn't get home until 10 p.m. or later, it doesn't interfere with her natural sleep because she's not falling asleep until 1. So that shift work, swing shift job is not shift work for her. Whereas for me, I like to go to sleep at 9:30 at night. And if I had to be working at a restaurant until 10 p.m., it definitely would cause me some symptoms because it's interfering with my natural sleep hours. So really think about personalized medicine in that way. Okay, this is what a shift worker's sleep pattern typically is. And this is someone who's working overnight. So let me orient you first just to this graph. We're going to have several slides with this format. All right. So each row is a day. And here at the top, we've got time from noon here on the left, midnight in the middle, to the following 11 a.m. So 24 hours. Each column is 1 hour. Blue is the sleep period. Gray is the night shift. And then these upside down triangles are the core body temperature minimum. So remember, we want our core body temperature minimum is typically about 3 to 4 hours before we naturally wake up. At our core body temperature minimum, our sleep is going to be the best. If we have to be awake, our performance is going to be challenged. Our motivation is likely to be lower than typical, and we're not going to feel very alert. All right. So this was from a study done in 2012. And basically, what most shift workers try when they have days off to sleep at night and to be awake during the day. And then on these work nights, they try to catch some sleep during the day, but it's often quite irregular. If we look at this person, the first day here, they go to sleep at 11, they wake up at 7, it's a day off. They're up at 7, they stay up all day, they go into work at 7 p.m., and they work all night. So by the end of the first shift, they've been up for 24 hours. They go home, they sleep about 3 hours, they're up for a little bit, they sleep another couple, and then they go in for their second shift work night. And by the end of their second shift work night, they've slept only about 5 hours out of the last 48. Do we want that person to be doing anything important at 5 o'clock in the morning? Probably not, right? They're going to really struggle to perform well. And the pattern continues. Then here in the middle, they have a couple days off where they're sleeping at night, and they're sleeping extended periods because their sleep debt is so high. This person is going to struggle with their sleep during the day. They're going to struggle with their alertness at night. Let's look at this next slide here. This is a much better pattern. I have it here graphically, and then the next slide, which you are going to get a copy of the slides after the presentation. The next slide, I have it listed out as the steps to take. So let's just go through this graphically, and then we'll look at it stepwise too. Okay, so this is a person whose shifts are the same. They're working 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. in the gray. What you do first, notice these sleep hours on the right that are circled. You want to create a block of 3 to 4 hours that they're always sleeping, regardless of whether it's a day off or it's a work day. They always sleep these same hours. In this person, it's from 8 a.m. until noon. They're always going to sleep. Then you want to make sure that they're getting adequate light that's going to help them sleep during the day and being alert at night. So you can see these suns here on the left. That's an extended period of preferably daylight. It happens at 1 o'clock in the afternoon or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Basically that 20 to 30 minutes of outside light. And then you give them light pulses depicted in these yellow vertical bars during the night shift. That will help improve their alertness. It's also going to help maintain their circadian rhythm with this sleep during the day. Then in these written numbers here are the doses for melatonin. You're going to have them take melatonin, that low dose, 0.3 milligrams, about 6 hours before the desired bedtime when they're going to sleep early. You can see on their days off, they're going to sleep at 3 or 4 and sleeping until noon. On their day sleep on work days, they're going to bed at 8 and they're sleeping until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So you're going to have them phase shift for earlier, phase advance earlier on their days off so they can fall asleep at 3 or 4 at night. And then you're also going to have them take a 3 milligram melatonin right at bedtime when they get home in the morning, and they're going to try to sleep all day. That is using it as a hypnotic and very effective. All right, so here's the steps of creating a shift worker sleep plan. First, identify how much sleep your client does best with. One of the problems that shift workers have is they are more likely to be chronically sleep deprived. They're simply just not getting enough hours of sleep each night. You want to schedule sleep for work days and days off with a standard block of the 3 to 4 hours. The third bullet here, schedule bright light upon awakening, schedule dim light for 1 to 2 hours before bed. You want to schedule meal, exercise, and social interactions as Zeitgebers. Zeitgeber is a German word that means time cue, and light is the main Zeitgeber, but meal times, exercise, social interactions also have a circadian effect. They strengthen the circadian rhythm if they are at regular times. And then melatonin supplementation to shift their body clock, 0.3 or here 0.5 milligrams 6 hours before bed on their earlier nights, 3 milligrams when they arrive home for a morning bedtime. Consider other treatments to improve sleep and alertness. There was a question that was submitted earlier about armodafinil, which is a pharmaceutical that's used to improve alertness in shift workers, obstructive sleep apnea, and narcolepsy. And I just wanted to be clear that armodafinil does not have an effect in resetting your circadian rhythm. It simply increases alertness at the time that you take it, but it doesn't impact your alertness. It doesn't impact your circadian rhythm, excuse me. And then you might also want to brainstorm activities that the patient can enjoy doing on their own late at night so that they can effectively be up and happily be up until 3 or 4 in the morning to have those consolidated sleep times. And then make sure that they're getting adequate time in the afternoons with friends and family. So let's look at a case here. This was a 28-year-old single woman. She's an ICU nurse. She's working 7 p.m. to 7:30 a.m., 2 to 4 nights in a row, and then she's separated by 2 to 3 nights off. She shares an apartment with a roommate and bike commutes to and from work. She's having daytime sleepiness, fatigue during her work, and on days off, anxiety and digestive upset. Her goal is to be able to happily and safely ski on her days off. She's an avid skier, have less anxiety, and feel more mentally alert at work, especially in that 4 to 5 a.m. hour. When you talk to shift workers, you'll be able to see when their core body temperature minimum is, because they'll say, that's my hardest time to be effective. So this is the treatment plan that I gave her, which is what you saw before. Part that I didn't point out that I want to emphasize is, notice when people have a plan which is really consolidating their sleep hours, using melatonin strategically, and getting light at the right times, what will happen is their core body temperature minimum, pictured here in the orange triangle, will shift into their sleep period. As soon as it shifts into their sleep period, they will be sleeping much better during the day and able to get closer to the hours of sleep that they need. They're also going to report feeling much better, performing better, being more comfortable with their work and their alertness at night, which we want. So AJ, the first visit, it was 3 visits for her. We created her sleep-wake schedule. We had her use blue blocking glasses on the commute home, something like this. Good strategy for people who are commuting between work and going to sleep in the mornings, because it will it'll help them avoid getting light at the wrong time. We had her do a journaling exercise to put her thoughts aside before bed, because she was having a racing mind, and planned what she could do in the late evenings and on her days off. The second visit, when she came in, she's sleeping somewhat better during the day, but she's still anxious. We reviewed her bedroom space, made sure that it was really dark, standardized her meal times across all days of the week. That's what the M is in that in her schedule, and found times to socialize and ski that fit her new sleep schedule. And when she came in the third appointment, she's sleeping much better. She's sleeping well. She's feeling less anxious, with better energy during her wake times. And then we discuss ways to maintain this schedule and what to do when special events, holidays and travel come up. All right. So these are the criteria for jet lag disorder. Certainly travel is picking up this year. Complaint of insomnia or excessive daytime sleepiness accompanied by a reduction of total sleep time that's associated with travel, at least across 2 time zones. They're associated impairment of daytime function, malaise, or somatic symptoms. Our circadian system impacts our digestive function. Digestion is really set to be kind of turned off during the night and much more active during the day. So it's very common with circadian rhythm disruption that people will have GI complaints. Somebody asked about what can you do to prevent jet lag, and this is one strategy that I have done with clients that works really well, and that is to start phase shifting them in advance. What you do here to orient you to this chart is you correlate. In this first row, I have time in Pacific Standard Time. Then I have their corresponding time in their destination. This person was going to Spain. And then you can see 3 days before their travel, we start phase shifting them earlier. You can phase shift somebody earlier. You could, depending on the location that they're going to, maybe it makes sense to phase delay them. But basically, blue is the sleep period. Black is when they're wearing their blue blocking goggles. You want to allow their natural melatonin to start rising those 2 hours before bed. And then you can see this dose of melatonin, 0.3 or 0.5 milligrams 6 hours before bedtime. And I just shift their body clock an hour a day. One important thing that I think people don't know is that your body clock can only shift at most an hour a day. And that's why we get jet lag. That's why shift workers have a hard time. And it's for shift workers, it's just really not possible to shift back and forth from sleeping at night for a few days to sleeping during the day, during the work days. That's just not going to work because we have this limiting factor that our circadian rhythm can only shift at most an hour a day. All right, so that is a diagram of the strategy. And then here it is written out, evaluating the number of hours of shift, the time change, their preferred wake hours, creating a scheduled graph. I find that is pretty easy for people. And keep in mind the body clock only shifting 1 hour per day, using that low dose melatonin 5 to 6 hours before the desired sleep onset, bright light after awakening, and dark before bedtime. There are other strategies. Certainly that one is one that people have to plan ahead. They'll probably need guidance on creating a schedule like that. So some other strategies are to take 0.5 to 5 milligrams melatonin close to bedtime at your new destination. 5 milligrams will help people fall asleep more quickly than that lower dose. Slow release formulas are not effective in that situation, and it's more useful for traveling eastward and when you're traveling 5 or more time zones. That's when this taking melatonin close to bedtime is shown to be more helpful. Okay, let's talk next about daylight saving time. The problem with daylight savings time is that our social time and our body clock get out of alignment. Let's look at this first diagram here at the top, which is representing standard time. Standard time, our solar clock and social clock match up. So the sun is in the middle of its trajectory, and it's noon on our clock. If you look at daylight saving time, our social clock is 2 to 3 hours earlier than our solar clock. So we get out of alignment that way. Some of the consequences of daylight saving time are actually pretty significant. Increased injuries, both workplace injuries and also collisions. Cardiovascular events can increase up to 29% in some studies. Immune health is impacted. And then emotional and mental health, increased depressive episodes, sleep deprivation of this time change impairs mood, alertness, and cognitive functioning. And then you can even find decreased helping and increased loneliness. So I think it has potentially a bigger effect on people than they're realizing. The treatment for daylight saving time, you can have people plan ahead, going to bed 15 minutes earlier the 3 days beforehand, and just making that time change very, very gradual for themselves. You want them to continue to get bright light for 30 minutes soon after waking each morning. You can also take a low dose of melatonin at bedtime to help you sleep, or you can take it that 6 hours before bedtime to shift your body clock earlier. Avoid eating meals late. That shifts your body clock later, actually. And exercising in the morning, 7 a.m. or by 4 at least, is also going to help shift your body clock earlier. Make sure people are hydrating and have their trace minerals. That's going to help with brain functioning and alertness. Aim for drinking that 8 to 12 ounces of water every hour. So this next section, I want to talk about melatonin actions beyond sleep. Thinking back to that camping study where they looked at melatonin secretion times over summer and winter in that natural environment compared to in the built environment. One of my concerns is that over our lifetime in the built environment, our melatonin release is less. And because melatonin has these actions throughout the body, what kind of health consequences are we potentially exposing ourselves to by chronically suppressing our endogenous melatonin? And do we need to think about supplementing our melatonin so that we have that lifetime exposure to all the beneficial effects that we are potentially losing out from with chronic darkness deficiency? Okay, so these are some of the main functions of melatonin. This is not an exhaustive list. Blood pressure, cell proliferation, immune system, gut microbiome regulation. It is regulating hormone synthesis, and it has a neurotrophic factor and is protective for the neurons. It also has a role in the glymphatic system. The glymphatic system is a lymph system in the brain that opens up to almost twice its size during sleep, particularly non-REM sleep, and helps clear the metabolic waste products. And one thing we know, and we have known for quite a while, is that there's an association between poor sleep and Alzheimer's disease. And part of that relationship is likely to be due to the glymphatic system not having as much time to open up and clear those beta amyloid proteins. These are some of the uses throughout the body for central nervous system conditions, for cardiovascular conditions. Think of the high number of people who have high cholesterol or hypertension, lots of relevance there. Melatonin also has been shown to be effective in the reproductive system for a few conditions, in the GI system and immune, and then musculoskeletal system, which certainly is a concern for many women and men as they grow older. Phytomelatonin is a herbal melatonin made from alfalfa, chlorella, and rice. It is bioidentical to the melatonin in our bodies. You can see this paper here about the phytomelatonin complex. One of the things that really motivates me to use phytomelatonin rather than synthetic is that it is a very potent free radical scavenger. Melatonin and its metabolites can scavenge up to one molecule of melatonin, I should say, and its metabolites can scavenge up to 10 ROS and RNS, free oxygen, free nitrogen species, and that is really powerful. In some rodent studies, actually, it is as effective as vitamin C, E, and glutathione as an antioxidant. It also inhibits inflammation and is much stronger than the synthetic melatonin. And in cell assays, it is also more active as an anti-inflammatory. Cellular health, I think, of very important for melatonin, and mitochondria are very rich in melatonin. One thing that is a concern is that as we age, our melatonin production declines significantly. Older adults are producing just a fraction of the melatonin that people produce in their 20s and 30s, 40s. It's in the 50s when it really declines quite significantly. And so I think about melatonin having potentially a role for anti-aging. I think that this is a way to help our patients maintain their long-term health when you think about all of the actions of melatonin throughout the body. And So consider that too. I would do a low dose, the 0.3 milligrams, which is really a physiological dose. Above 1 milligram is more of a pharmaceutical dose of melatonin. So when you're thinking about using melatonin long-term for anti-aging, I would do that 0.3 milligrams. All right, so that brings us to the conclusion here. I hope that you got good value out of this. We are going to be sending out the slide deck and some resources. One of the resources we have is a very nice questionnaire looking at, is your client getting adequate darkness at night? Or are they getting too much light and it is going to suppress their endogenous melatonin? And what can you do about that? What kinds of supplementation practices would you want to use? All right, so we have time for some questions.